Hey guys, welcome to the new episode of the Global Desi podcast. Today, the discussion is going to be something that you might have often heard on social media as well as media as to the impact of immigrants and migration on the housing situation. We would start off with explaining our personal experience in how we went about finding our first accommodations in the new country, and then discuss our personal views on the topic as to the impact of immigration on our views on the topic of housing crisis that many countries across the world are facing nowadays. So we'll start with discussing with our experiences in finding our first accommodation. So Vivian, will probably start with you. How was your experience in finding your first abode, getting your property and everything in UK and when you were in Middle East?
Hi, Chicho. Yeah, interesting topic once again. And I think everybody needs a house to live, isn't it? So, this is a very, very important topic, especially for people who are considering moving to a foreign country, leaving their country of birth. Now, I'll not talk too much about the Middle East because I think it will be an oversimplification of facts. Because in the Middle East, we were provided with company accommodation, and which was fairly high quality, fully furnished. So we just had to bring our clothes and our sentimental items, and we could basically set up home there. Whereas when we came into the UK, we had to do everything from scratch. So I think this is where people need to give a little bit more thought. So I would break it up into a number of little points. First of all, the question of whether you want to rent or buy. I think best option is to rent initially, trial out a particular area, see if you like it, see if you like the community, see if you like the schools around the area, see if you like the facilities around the area, and then make a decision on whether you want to buy or you want to move to a different part. Second comes to the more practical decisions with regards to how do you navigate the market in itself? How do you do your own research? How do you find out the properties that are available? How do you deal with the landscape of real estate agents here, which is not a formally organized sector in India and in the subcontinent, but it is an absolutely formal sector here. And then how do you go about the various legalities of actually getting the keys to your home? So when we came in here, as I've mentioned in previous episodes, which you can find a link to, we stayed in a hotel for about 3 to 3.5 weeks. And during which time, there are two popular websites in the UK for housing, either renting or for owning a house. And these links will be given in the description below if people are really interested in having a look. So the options that we look for are Rightmove and Zoopla. So these cover, I'm told, at least 90% of the total housing stock that's available for renting or buying in the UK. So if you are somebody who is in the housing market looking to rent or buy, these are websites which I would suggest to go as a first port of call. And you go in there, you try to put in your area, you try to fix up your budget, the number of rooms, whether you want a furnished or unfurnished accommodation, etc. And it will give you a number of options. And with each of these options, there will be most definitely a real estate agent involved who's taking care of the property. So you would have to call up the real estate agent, set up a viewing appointment, go for a viewing, and it will be an accompanied viewing along with the estate agent. And then you can ask the estate agent all the kinds of questions that you like. And then if you like it, then you have to provide certain other details where you'll be subject to a number of background checks on the basis of which the landlord will decide whether to give you the accommodation or not. Now, this is as far as renting is concerned. Buying, we'll come back to it at a later stage. But before that, what is the situation like in Australia or even in the US when you first landed there?
The situation is very similar, unlike India, where you just look for an advertisement in paper or social media and just reach out to the owner directly. Both in US and in Australia, we used to go through an agent. The agent used to do all the showing. There's a very high likelihood that in the whole process, you would not even meet your landlord even once. The money goes into a bank account that you have certain details of. You probably wouldn't even know who that bank account belongs to. There would be a rental bond involved, which would officially be present and locked away in a certain account, which would stay there, and neither the landlord nor the tenant can actually access it till the end of lease. One major difference that I noticed between India, US, and Australia was in India and US, we used to pay our rent monthly, whereas in Australia, the rents are weekly.
Okay.
And so when somebody advertises that $550, it would mean $550 per week, not $550 per month. Because the very first time I looked at a rental advertisement and it said 500 for rent, and I was like, wow, that's really cheap, because back in US I used to pay about 1,200 to 1,300 in New Jersey. But then I realized that, well, that amount is not per month, it's per week. So that's something that you have to take care of. But like you rightly said, here everything is very structured. You have to go for showings. It's often a very formal affair where people are queuing up outside. Now, even more so because of the huge rental crisis. You go to a unit, you find out how it is, you sign a lease if the owner approves of it. And then when you're leaving the unit, you need to have it cleaned and set it up in the same manner that you actually left it at. And if that's not the case, then the bond that you initially paid, money would be deducted out of it. If not, then they would release that rental bond. And in Australia, at least, that rental bond used to be stuck with the rental bond agents. It's NSW rental bond. So
Yeah.
you used to give an approval, the landlord used to give an approval, and then the money used to directly come from there into your account. At no point, neither like I said, the tenant or the owner didn't have access to that money at all. Whereas back in India, I think it's more like they give you the money. That money is for the landlord to use in any manner he wants, and at the end of the lease the landlord would decide how to give off. But here everything is very, very legal and formal, as long as you're going through the legal way. Obviously people find loopholes and three or four people come together and the bond is in one person's name, and there are ways around it. I was lucky when I was new. I didn't go about the rental bond structure. At least for first 3 or 4 months when I was alone here and Neha was in US, I lived in a serviced apartment in which one of the rooms were mine, and I had to pay a fixed weekly payment which included electricity and everything. But then when Neha moved to Australia and we got our own first rental place, obviously everything fell on me and everything had to go through the said process. That's how it was for me.
Yeah, I think those are points that are worth reiterating. The first is the deposit does not sit with the landlord. It sits in a neutral bank account. In the UK, it's called a deposit protection service. And
Mm.
most tenants will get their deposit with little or no deduction. And it is assumed that there will be general wear and tear to the apartment as long as there is no material damage to the property. So you will get back most, if not all, of your deposit. And the second point is it needs to be a planned and structured process. So if you are in a need of a house immediately, then you would have to look for Airbnbs or temporary accommodation before you actually go through the rental route. Because from the time you identify the house that you want to the time you get keys will approximately be about 15 to 20 days easily. At least that's my experience in the UK.
How was your experience buying a property in UK?
So the house we rented was in a very good area. It had some very good schools and good transport links, etc. So we sort of made an offer to the owner of our rental property that we'd like to buy it. But I think the owner was in a different kind of situation, and they were just building up their rental property portfolio. So they did not want to let go of it. So although we did make 2 or 3 different offers to the owner, because first of all, I was lazy, I didn't want to move, our offers were not even considered. So that is when we cast the net out wider, and we predominantly looked at it from the point of view of secondary school education for the daughter. Primary schools generally are quite good, and they are much more in number compared to secondary schools. Secondary schools are fewer but larger in size. So it is very, very important that you get the right kind of secondary school within your catchment area. Because in most regions within the UK, where you live determines where you get access to secondary schools. So the catchment will be a very, very important consideration as far as getting admission into a local secondary school is concerned. So we had a few fixed areas where there were good, highly rated secondary schools, and we were only looking around those areas. And the flip side to that is the prices of property tends to be higher in areas where there are good secondary schools within the catchment. So this is a little bit of a give and take, and you need to prioritize what it is depending upon your situation. Many people choose to move into a cheaper area initially, and as the children grow up and as you move up the social and economic ladder, they tend to move on to the slightly better areas as well. But that's completely up to choice, and that option is available. In the UK, people are not averse to moving houses every few years, because there are people who start off with a small apartment, then they move into a two-bedroom house, they move into a three-bedroom house, and finally they move into what they call is their dream home or the family home. Whereas that concept again did not exist in India. So wherever we grew up in was considered to be our family home. And I think I lived in my family home in India for about 35 years. Well, rather, my parents lived there for 35 years. I moved out a bit earlier. So it wasn't considered to be a family home. But here in the UK, they have separate ideas and thoughts of what would be a starter home and what would be a family home. So that is an interesting concept as well. And that's an interesting cultural dimension that you get to learn once you come into a new country.
So in my case, I started off renting, much like you. And then I guess it was our second or third move when Neha said that she doesn't want to keep on moving every other year because, see, there are multiple reasons that you have to move. Either the person doesn't want to rent anymore, or they have increased the rent too much.
Hmm.
So the by second or third move, Neha was like, "Yeah, I don't want to really move so much. It wouldn't really make sense." Until then, I was really against the idea of owning a property. And when Neha said that, I got this idea of to actually determine whether renting versus buying, which actually does make sense. Luckily, by that time, because we had moved in from US, we did have some amount of money that we could actually use for the deposits. And then, while doing my research, I figured out that every time we are paying a rental, that's money that we are actually losing out on because we never get that money back. And this was just pre-COVID. And back then, the interest rates were like really low. Like in Australia, the interest rates were 1.8, 1.9, which is like very, very low. And we were like, if we have that kind of interest rate, let's go and get ourselves our own unit to start with, because I didn't want to take a responsibility of a new house right away, because house would have lot more responsibilities on us, whereas in case of a unit we can easily have it might be getting managed by a strata or whatever. So we went about searching for a new unit, we looked for places, and so it was about December when I thought that we'll get a place, and by January Feb we already had nailed down to a unit that we are living in right now, that we decided to be our next home. So I bought this property at that minimal interest rate of whatever 1.9 or 2, which is like nothing compared to the high interest rates right now. And at present, we are looking to go to a bigger place, but we haven't really planned it out much. That was a time when we were not planning to really have kids. Like kids were not even in something that we were planning to have ever. But then finally we did decide to have kids and we had Skylar. So now our priorities have slightly changed. We want to get a bigger house because when Skylar grows up 3 or 4 years down the line, she would definitely want her own room. So right now we live in a 2-bedroom unit. We probably want to go on and expand to a house which has one room for Skylar, a couple of rooms for guests. A couple of rooms, I say, because after COVID, this whole work from home situation has also led to a situation where we would like to have our own workspace within our home. Probably not something that we thought of pre-COVID, because work from home becoming such an integral part of our professional lives was not expected. The house rates have increased a lot, even in places which are quite far away from this main city, because people have started working from home, so commute is not a problem. So that has increased the rates a lot. So we have to really plan out what our next move is going to be. And then whenever we buy a property, and I guess it might be same in UK because that's how it's in Australia, you have to have a solicitor, you have to have all the stamp duty done. The solicitor has to be paid a certain amount. Since a rental agent is involved, since a buyer's agent or a seller's agent is involved, they have to be given a certain amount. Then there's this huge amount of the stamp duty, all that we have to provide. So if suppose you have a 500,000 Australian dollar house, it would usually come out to be 550 to 570 by the time it's actually in your hands. Luckily, when we were buying a property, there was a first home buyer situation going on where government did not actually require us to pay the stamp duty, and then we were actually being paid to buy our first house. So that was another aspect that prompted us to actually get our own place. So yeah, depending on the situation and depending on the time that you actually want to get your own place, you should do a lot of research, look for the best agent around you, look for all the government opportunities and government schemes that are available, and only then make a decision whether you really want to buy a property or not. That's how it's in Australia, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's very interesting. And in terms of the housing stock, I'm sure the housing stock is slightly different in Australia as it is in the UK. So I think it will be quite interesting for viewers to have a comparison in terms of the type of housing stock available. So, what are the general categories of houses that you find in Australia? And
So
what is
what
the quality and what are the ages of the properties?
So what we generally have here are called units, townhouses, villas, and houses.
Mhm.
So units are like apartments back in India. Townhouses are they're essentially houses, but they have usually have a shared wall. So
Mm,
probably a duplex kind of a setup. A house would be an independent house and land package.
mm,
The house and land package is usually which appreciates a lot because the land price increases a lot for a simple reason that a land which has one house today could actually be bulldozed and converted into a standing building with multiple houses. So the land size and the land value would increase a lot more than a house would. Units usually don't increase by much relatively, but they do have some kind of an appreciation depending on your locality. Townhouses are the same. Townhouses and units have something called strata,
mhm,
which is kind of like back in India, there used to be the managing committee of the complex that you're living in, who basically collect money from everyone in order to maintain the community. So back in India, probably we call it a maintenance fee. So that's
yeah.
something that's associated with a unit or an apartment, or in some cases, even townhouses.
Mhm.
But in case of houses, because you're taking care of the whole property on your own, you don't have anything additional. But both of them also have a council fee. So other than your yearly mortgage, you would have to consider the strata fee and the council fee in case of an apartment or a townhouse. In case of house, you would have to consider the usual wear and tear maintenance and the council fee. How is it in UK?
Yeah, it's quite similar, but it's called slightly differently. So, for example, we do have apartments here, but apartments are mainly within the city centers and mainly within the larger city centers as well. So, as you move out of the city centers, there are mainly houses, and houses mainly come in three categories. One is terraced houses, which I think is quite similar to your townhouses. So, it will be a row of houses, and these houses will have common walls between them. And they may have a little bit of a front garden, and they will usually have a back garden. But generally, these houses do not come with off-road parking facilities.
Hmm.
The second category of houses is what we call a semi-detached house. A semi-detached house is a group of two houses with one common wall between them. And these houses may or may not have parking depending on the area in which they are built. So if it's a newish area, there is possibility that there will be more land available, so there will be off-road parking. But in some of the well-established mature areas, there will only be on-road parking available. And the third type of housing is the detached house, where you have one house per land parcel, and these may or may not come with a garage or off-road parking facilities. And these are generally larger sized properties. One thing which is important to consider as far as the UK housing stock is concerned is a lot of the housing stock is quite old, and it is not uncommon for people to buy, renovate, and use a house from the early 1900s. So, for example, you have specific years in which there was a huge amount of house building activity going on. So we have the 1930s Victorian houses, which are quite popular till today. People still live in them. Some people aspire to live in a 1930s Victorian house because it's got that charm, it's got the period charm, it's got those big rooms, etc., which are less common in modern houses. And then there is the 1960s and the 1970s estates, which are relatively common and widespread around the UK. In fact, the one we live in is a 1960s estate. I think it is dated approximately 1965. Nobody knows the exact time because the entire estate was developed at a certain point, and ours is dated around 1965. And in India, I think it would be almost unthought of to buy a house that is 60 years old, whereas in the UK, because of the quality of housing stock available and the age of the housing stock available, it is not uncommon at all. And then you have sporadic new developments as well. And new developments generally come with much stricter building codes and building regulations, which mean they have very good insulation properties, etc., within the house. And the flip side to that is the rooms are slightly smaller compared to the older properties.
So the houses in UK, are they concrete or are they wood?
They have brick walls to the external, and the internal walls could be either brick or it could be timber.
Mm.
Now, in terms of mortgages as well, the mortgage companies have different criteria for lending. So, a brick wall with a tiled roof is the most standard form of housing in the UK, for which you will get a mortgage quite easily. Whereas all the others will be special considerations, and the mortgage company will have to take out and carry out their own risk assessments before they provide you with a mortgage.
So you're saying that a concrete house with brick walls, both inside and outside, would be easier to get a mortgage for it compared to a house which has timber walls? Is that what you meant?
No. So there are two things in this. You just have to consider the nuances here. A concrete house is different. A brick house is different. So brick house is brick built with cement mortar. Whereas a concrete house could be poured concrete, or it could be
Mm-hmm.
made of concrete blocks, or it could be made of concrete panels. And that is called non-standard construction here, because of which
Oh,
there will
but
be a risk assessment to be carried out before the mortgage company lends you some money.
so you're saying a brick house would be stronger by standards compared to a poured concrete house?
I think there is proof, and you have brick houses here standing from before the 19th century, so
Oh,
which
okay.
are very good quality. So it all depends on the quality of materials that you use.
Interesting, because back in US and in Australia, the most units that I've lived in, obviously they are built by concrete slabs and metal and everything, but the door, the walls within and the walls separating different rooms are all gypsum.
Mhm.
So whereas back in India, like with whatever houses or units I've lived in, everything always used to be concrete or brick walls. So it was very new for us when we went to US and we could actually knock on the wall and it was actually wood,
Yeah.
which used to sound really strange because I remember back in India when we used to watch these US shows and they had termites eating into their house. I used to be like, how can termite eat into concrete? It's only later that I realized it's because everything's made of wood.
Yeah.
And I guess it's basically got to do with the insulation factor, maybe.
Absolutely. And this is a completely different and an exhaustive topic by itself. So if anybody is interested in to learn more about the quality and the type of housing stock available in Australia, US, or the UK, more than happy, please drop us a line and I can explain these things to you. I am a civil engineer as well, so I do understand a thing or two about buildings and how buildings are made. So yeah, this is an interesting topic, at least as far as I'm concerned, because of my background.
Yeah.
So if you are interested, do let us know and I can talk more about this.
Yeah, I guess the viewers can easily see how your eyes are like widened and sparkling the moment I started talking about different kinds of houses. So definitely you would be a good source of information. Now that we have already spoken about our experience buying and renting property in Australia and UK, what is your understanding of the common narrative where everybody says that because of huge immigration into the Western countries, the rates of houses are really increasing? What do you think about it?
Well, let's just break down to the facts, right? It is a well known fact and it's well established and it is proven by data that there is a huge housing shortage in the UK. And also, when it comes to affordable housing, there is an even greater shortage. Now, the second question we need to come back to is, does it all depend on the quantity of immigration that comes into the UK, or is it an intrinsic issue that needs to be sorted out at a policy level? Now, ever since I've been following news about the UK for the last 20 years or so, there has been something or the other in the news with regards to targets of house building for each government tenure. Unfortunately, I do not think any of the governments have hit the targets that they've set out for house building during their terms. For example, we have a new government here in the UK at the moment, and I think the commitment is to have 1.5 million new homes by the end of the term in 5 years, which means approximately 300,000 new homes. Now, whether that target will be achieved at the end of 5 years or not, we shall wait and watch. But I think progressively it's become an issue due to the limited number of new houses being built, because of which there is a huge difference and a huge mismatch in the supply and demand, because of which prices are going up. There is also talk that prices are gone up so much in London that the youngsters may no longer be able to afford to buy a house in London. So these are concerns that are very real, but whether you can attribute all of that to immigration is something that we need to consider at a more macro level, because I think UK is made up of about 10 to 15% migrant population, and a lot of these migrants are already second generation or third first generation migrants who already own their own homes. So if you're talking about a smaller percentage of the migrant population who've come in as first generation immigrants to the UK, I don't think they are going to impose such a huge load on the housing situation in the UK. So I think there is something which is much more at a macro level that we need to look at. Australia has been inviting people to come into the country because of low populations, isn't it? So how is it there?
It was so the case for the longest period of time because obviously compared to UK, Australia doesn't have as big a population. What's the population of UK?
I think it should be about 65 to 70 million now.
Yeah. So Australia right now is at about 27 million, which is way less compared to many other developed countries. And other thing is a large percentage of population is also aging. That's one of the reasons that the government has been trying to bring in more migrants. But there is a huge policy issue where the country is inviting more migrants, but it doesn't have as many houses available for supply, which is causing this problem. So I wouldn't say that migration is not causing a housing problem, but it's definitely not the only factor, considering that the house prices were increasing even during the COVID time, where actually the whole migration thing was zero. Like there were no new people coming into the country, but still the rates were rising. Back then, the reason was extremely low interest rates. Since then, the interest rates have really gone high, but again, the number of people who are coming in is increasing too, because of which the new migrants usually impact the rental situation, the rental houses, not the houses up for purchase. The reason that the houses go up for purchase is many people who have a lot of money, they're buying new properties to make them an investment property in order to gain from the rental boom. At least that's what I think. So what's that leading to is people are buying property with the intent of setting up for rental, and these are those people who are already earning a lot through rental from other places, and that's kind of making the rich richer, whereas the poor or the middle class is not even able to put their feet into the market because they don't have that backing to fall back on. So I agree, immigration could be one of the factors, but it's the policies that the government needs to look into. One thing I often think is government should reduce the number of additional properties that you can actually have instead of the one that you're actually living in, because that would make housing, which is supposed to be one of the fundamental provisions of the government, to be converted into something which is more of a money making business. Would let it either be through rentals or by like accumulating so many properties, and then like you said, your owner did not want to sell the house because he wanted to increase his rental portfolio. So these are the people who have been paying off their mortgages and having properties and then increasing their rates in order to make a lot of money, which is further causing the rates of the houses to go pretty high. I guess that's one situation that the government should look into. They should look into this whole aspect of negative gearing, in which investment houses are actually giving you investment benefits and all these aspects. So yes, migration is a huge factor, but it's definitely not the only factor.
Okay, let's close on this note. If we've been able to answer your specific questions with regard to housing in Australia, UK, or in fact in the US as well, then do drop us a comment and let us know. Or if we've instigated further questions, do let us know and we'll be more than happy to answer those questions as well. So if you've enjoyed this episode, do consider subscribing to our channel so that you get information about more such different topics that we bring to you in terms of the perspectives of migrants from Indian subcontinents in Western countries. Do drop us a like because it really helps us and keeps the motivation up. Do take care, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks, Jijo.
Thanks, Evian. Everyone, have a good day.